The corporate boardroom felt abnormally warm, the heavy air pressing down on me as Valerie Mercer slid the termination papers across the dark mahogany table. She did not look up from her tablet, her fingers tapping against the screen in a rapid, impatient rhythm. She told me that the director had convinced her my role as chief infrastructure architect was no longer essential to the company. She said they were restructuring Altus Systems, her voice cold, dry, and flat. My stomach tightened in response. 12 years of my life. 12 years spent building this company's entire digital core from the ground up, now reduced to a 60-minute exit window. Julian Thorne leaned against the wall near the door, his arms crossed over his chest. A small, smug smile played on the corner of his lips, confirming everything I already suspected. He had been looking for a way to push me out since the day he was hired 4 years ago. A veteran architect who understood the systems he could not grasp was too much of a threat to his fragile pride. I remembered when I first started Altus Systems. It was a small startup operating out of a dusty converted warehouse. The founder, Preston Shaw, was a man of vision. He knew that to compete with the tech giants, we needed something different. He gave me the freedom to design a system that did not just run, but breathed. I spent years perfecting the biomimetic cycling protocol. It was an elegant system that mimicked the circadian rhythms of living organisms. Instead of running every server at maximum capacity 24 hours a day, the protocol rotated the processing loads, letting server clusters enter low-power states to rest and clear their cache. It saved the company 50% in energy costs and reduced hardware failures by 80%. But Julian Thorne could not comprehend it. To him, if a server was not running at 100% capacity all the time, it was wasted resources. Valerie asked if I had any questions, her eyebrow arched, clearly irritated that I had not gathered my things and left already. I kept my voice perfectly flat and steady. Just one, I said. Who is going to manage the adaptive cycling protocol? Julian stepped forward, a patronizing smirk on his face. We are implementing an always-on architecture, he replied. Your cycling system was inefficient. Modern enterprise networks do not need rest periods. He spoke with absolute confidence, the kind of ignorance that only exists in corporate leadership. I nodded, keeping my thoughts to myself. I stood up and smoothed my jacket. In that case, I wish you both the best of luck. Valerie told me that security would meet me at my desk, already swiping to the next page on her screen. As I walked past Julian, he whispered that I should have stayed in my lane. I cleared my workspace methodically, Officer Harris shifting his weight from foot to foot beside me. I packed my coffee mug, my notebooks, and the framed photo of my son, Toby. I deleted absolutely nothing from my computer. I changed no admin passwords, and I altered no settings. I simply gathered my belongings and walked out with my head held high, while my coworkers looked away in silence. It was painful to watch people I had mentored for a decade suddenly pretend I did not exist. They knew what I had built, but corporate survival is a powerful motivator. Back at my quiet house, I kicked off my shoes and opened a bottle of bourbon. I poured a glass and sat by the window, watching the rain start to fall against the glass pane. I knew that the cycling protocol was scheduled to run at midnight, shifting the processing loads and letting different server clusters enter a low-power state. But Julian had overridden it. My phone started ringing at exactly 2:45 in the morning. 8 missed calls and 15 text messages filled my screen, each message more frantic than the last. The servers were crashing, customer portals were offline, and the systems were rapidly overheating. I poured a glass of water and waited, watching the minutes slowly tick past. By 4:30 in the morning, Julian called me directly. "What did you do?" he snarled. I answered that I had done absolutely nothing, and that was the exact problem. He demanded that I fix it immediately or the company would sue me. I asked him what they would sue me for, since I had only built a system that functioned perfectly until they decided to break it. I took a slow sip of my drink. Those servers were calibrated for load cycling, I explained. If you run them continuously at maximum capacity, they will burn themselves out. He screamed that it was sabotage, but I told him it was simply thermodynamics. I suggested he check the maintenance logs, since everything was documented, but he had never bogged himself down to read them. 3 hours later, Valerie called me herself, her voice shaking with panic. She told me to name my price because they needed me back immediately. I lay back on my sofa, realizing the game had finally begun. I told her that my rate would be 35% of whatever this outage was costing them, billed as an emergency consulting fee. Valerie gasped, calling it extortion. I replied that it was simply the market rate for emergency recovery from catastrophic failures. She hesitated, then told me to get to the office. I did not rush. I took my time, enjoying a quiet breakfast and a second cup of coffee before driving back to the company office. When I arrived, the server room was in absolute chaos. Exhausted technicians were typing frantically, and anxious executives hovered over them like vultures. The hardware was literally radiating heat, and the faint smell of hot silicon hung in the air from being pushed far beyond its physical limits. The cooling fans were screaming at maximum volume, attempting to cool down machines that were running continuously under heavy data loads. Amber and red warning lights were flashing across the server racks, indicating critical temperature thresholds had been crossed. Our primary database cluster, which handled over 70% of all customer transactions, was running at 98 degrees Celsius. The backup power systems hummed under the strain, and the emergency air conditioning units were struggling to keep up with the massive heat output. I walked in, set down my coffee, and assessed the damage. I ran a quick diagnostic command from my terminal, looking at the thermal sensors and memory usage tables. The entire system needs a 16-hour complete shutdown to cool down and perform a full reset, I announced. There is no other way. Valerie turned pale, protesting that 16 hours of downtime would cost them millions of dollars in lost business and client penalties. I agreed, noting it was entirely avoidable if she had listened to my warnings. Julian stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. He called my recommendation ridiculous and claimed they could force a manual system override to bypass the cooling cycle. I looked him dead in the eye and warned him that if he did, he would permanently fry half of their expensive hardware. The thermal expansion of the silicon substrates would cause microfractures in the motherboard traces, destroying their primary database servers. The room fell completely silent. Valerie swallowed hard, then told him to step back and let me do my job. For the next 16 hours, I sat in the darkened server room, watching the temperature gauges slowly drop to safe levels. I used the quiet time to document everything. I pulled the system logs, showing the override commands Julian had implemented, the warnings he had bypassed, and the automated alerts his team had dismissed. I compiled the evidence into a secure file. When the cooling period ended, I restarted the systems gradually, bringing the servers back online, cluster by cluster, while implementing the proper cycling protocols. By early morning, the network was functioning normally, and the relief in the building was palpable. I was summoned to Valerie's office, where Julian sat in a chair, silent and glaring. "The systems are stable," I reported, placing my tablet on the desk. "But there is a massive problem you need to understand." Valerie turned her monitor toward me, showing customer complaints flooding in. They were not just complaining about the outage, but about severe data corruption. Several major transactions from the past week were showing errors, and others were missing entirely. She accused my system of causing the corruption. I shook my head and sat down. "This is the cascading network failure I warned you about in my quarterly report," I explained. "When you force continuous processing without the required cycling periods, the database skips the data integrity checkpoints to keep up with the load. The write caching fails, and parity bits are lost, leading to database fragmentation." Julian slammed his hand on the table, claiming I was just blaming my design flaws on them. I countered that my design accounted for human error, but it could not account for the incompetence of ignoring the exact system specifications. Outside the office, employees paced nervously, watching our meeting through the glass. The news of the disaster had spread like wildfire. Valerie asked how long it would take to repair the corrupted files, her professional mask slipping. I told her it would take at least 3 days, and some of the data might be permanently lost. Julian stood up, declaring it unacceptable and threatening to bring in an external recovery team. I pointed out that an outside team would not understand the proprietary architecture. They would take twice as long and recover half as much data. Valerie's phone rang, and her eyes widened when she saw the name. It was Randall Finch, the representative of our largest corporate client, Apex Wholesale. She took the call on speakerphone, trying to sound cheerful, but Finch's voice was freezing. He demanded to know why their entire inventory system was offline, stating that the delay was costing them massive shipping penalties. Finch warned that they would discuss contract penalties later. He stated that Apex Wholesale could not afford even a single hour of disruption during their peak shipping season, and that this failure was a direct breach of our service level agreement. Valerie apologized repeatedly, her voice shaking as she tried to reassure him. Valerie looked at me, her eyes pleading for help. I quickly wrote a note on a pad and slid it to her, stating that I could restore their specific database first within 6 hours. She promised him that our chief architect was on it and his systems would be online in 6 hours. Once she hung up, Valerie collapsed into her chair, telling me to get to work. I smiled and informed her that because of the data corruption complexity, my consulting fee was now 45% of the total outage losses. Julian screamed that it was absurd, but Valerie silenced him, ordering him to restore my administrator credentials immediately. I spent the next 6 hours working at my old workstation, reconstructing the database tables for Apex Wholesale. I wrote a customized recovery script to rebuild the corrupt indices and restore the transaction log step by step. By the time the deadline arrived, their systems were fully operational and the client's inventory began moving again. I continued working through the night, stabilizing about 35% of the company's core systems. Near midnight, the server room door clicked open and Julian slipped inside. He stood over me, his voice low and threatening. He accused me of playing the hero to save my career after sabotaging them. I did not look up from my monitor as I told him that was a serious accusation to make without proof. I reminded him that I had documented the system limits in 12 separate reports, which he was paid to read but had ignored. Julian stepped closer, claiming he had checked the logs and found an authentication signature, showing I had accessed the servers remotely the night of the crash. I calmly explained that it was my automated monitoring ping, which was clearly described in the technical manuals. He hissed that when this crisis was over, he would make sure I was blacklisted from the entire tech industry. I told him that threatening the only person who could save the company was a bold strategy, and I returned to my work. The following morning, I presented a full recovery timeline to Valerie. I estimated it would take 7 days to achieve complete restoration of all databases. She looked exhausted, telling me the board of directors was meeting that afternoon and they wanted answers. I suggested that Julian would have plenty of explanations. Later that afternoon, I was summoned to the boardroom. 10 board members sat around the massive table with Valerie and Julian at one end. I was directed to sit at the opposite end, positioned as the outsider. Donald Croft, the board chairman, spoke first, asking if I had designed the infrastructure that failed. I stood up and explained that I had designed an infrastructure that ran flawlessly for 8 years, without a single second of unplanned downtime. It failed because Julian overrode the core operating protocol despite my written warnings. Julian interjected, claiming my cycling protocol was outdated, and that competitors used always-on systems. I countered that those competitors had double the energy costs and triple the hardware replacement rate. Altus Systems would need to replace 40% of its motherboard components every 18 months under Julian's architecture. Donald Croft raised his hand for silence and asked what it would cost to prevent this from happening again. Julian confidently proposed a full modernization plan, estimating it would cost $9 million for new hardware upgrades, plus an additional $3 million in annual operating costs. He claimed it was the only reliable path forward. He showed slides with complex diagrams, trying to overwhelm the board with technical jargon and buzzwords. The board members nodded slowly, clearly out of their depth. A board member then asked what it would cost to restore my original system. I replied that it would cost absolutely nothing, as the existing hardware was already optimized for it. The room fell silent as the board members processed the numbers. Donald Croft asked me to step out into the hallway while they deliberated. I walked out and ran the calculations. The company had already lost $12 million from the outage, My 45% fee would be substantial, but I knew they were desperate. After 20 minutes, I was called back in. Donald Croft announced they would restore my cycling protocol for now, but they wanted to transition to a hybrid system over the next 6 months. He offered me a 6-month consulting contract to oversee the transition. My rate would be triple my previous salary, plus the emergency fee we had agreed upon. I accepted the contract to review the terms. I walked out into the corridor and paced back and forth on the plush carpet. I ran the calculations on my phone, knowing that every minute they delayed was costing them thousands of dollars in lost transaction fees. The company was bleeding money, and they knew it. Over the next 3 days, I worked constantly, restoring the remaining databases. On the 4th day, I walked into my old office and found Julian going through my physical filing cabinet. I asked him if he was looking for something. He jumped, claiming he was researching for the transition. I told him those files were proprietary and outside his security access. I warned him that he was desperately searching for evidence of sabotage because he knew the entire $12 million disaster was his fault. Julian sneered, telling me to enjoy my brief victory, but that the company would implement his vision. I caught his arm as he tried to walk past, telling him that before this was over, everyone would see his true colors. That night, I reviewed the contract terms and noticed a hidden clause. It stated that the company would claim full ownership of my biomimetic computing methodology. I called my attorney, Diana Albright. She confirmed my suspicions. They wanted to drain my knowledge during the transition, take my intellectual property, and then discard me. I smiled, telling Diana I was going to draft a counteroffer they could not refuse, but would certainly regret. The next morning, as I prepared for my meeting with the board, my phone buzzed with an email alert. It was sent from Valerie's personal email account, with the subject line warning me about what Julian had hidden. Attached to the email was a document containing a series of messages between Julian and a competitor named Wesley Sharp, the chief technology officer of a rival firm, Zenith Cloud. My heart raced as I read the messages. They revealed a massive conspiracy. For 8 months, Julian had been feeding proprietary trade secrets, infrastructure logs, and client data to Sharp. The most damning message was sent just 2 days before my termination. Julian had written that once I was removed, they would proceed with Phase 2, disabling the cycling protocol to force a system crash. When the clients panicked, Julian's team would recommend migrating all databases to Sharp's company, Zenith Cloud, splitting the migration commission 70-30. My hands tightened around my phone. This was not just corporate politics, it was a federal crime. Under the Defend Trade Secrets Act, Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 1836, and the Economic Espionage Act, Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 1831, Julian had committed serious federal offenses. Furthermore, they were planning to lay off the entire internal IT team of 80 people without the required 60-day notice. Violating the Warren Act, Title 29 of the United States Code, Section 2101. The messages also detailed how they would blame the crash on my biological architecture, claiming it was an outdated model that was unstable and could not handle modern enterprise loads. They even discussed how they would divide the licensing fees for the Xenon database engine that they planned to force Altus Systems to buy. It was a complete betrayal of the company and the team. I immediately forwarded the files to Diana Albright and met Valerie in her office. She was pacing, her composure entirely gone, holding a cold cup of coffee she had clearly forgotten. She told me she had discovered the messages that morning during a routine check of Julian's internal communications. She was terrified that the board would hold her responsible for the oversight, which would end her career in executive management. She begged me not to share them with the board, fearing she would be blamed. I looked at her and stated that she had fired me based on Julian's fabricated reports, and now the company was facing complete ruin. I told her we were going to the boardroom together, and she was going to help me present this evidence, or she would face the consequences alone. When we entered the boardroom, Donald Croft and the other board members looked surprised. Before we discussed my transition contract, I began. Valerie has information regarding a massive security breach. Valerie connected her laptop to the screen, her hands shaking as the incriminating emails appeared before the board. The room erupted in gasps and angry whispers as the board members read the conspiracy details. Donald Croft's face turned dark red as he demanded to know where Julian was. Valerie replied that security was already escorting him out, and she had locked down his access. She also mentioned that our legal team was preparing a federal lawsuit. I stepped forward, inserting my flash drive into the projector. I informed the board that while recovering the database, I had uncovered further logs. My biomimetic system had automatically blocked 5 major external cyber attacks over the past year. These security events were never reported because the adaptive network healed itself. I explained that these features were not part of the standard documentation because they were my personal intellectual property. I distributed copies of my revised contract. The board members read the documents in silence. Donald Croft looked up, stating that my terms were unprecedented. My conditions were clear. First, I demanded full ownership of my biomimetic computing methodology, with Altus Systems receiving a non-exclusive license. Second, I required the creation of a Chief Innovation Officer position, reporting directly to the board. Third, I demanded an 18% royalty on all systems using my technology. Fourth, I required a seat on the board. One member accused me of exploiting their crisis, but I countered that I was simply establishing the value of the system that had saved them from total collapse. I told them that my technology was worth millions, and they were getting a discount. I made it clear that if they refused, I would walk away with my intellectual property and build my own firm, leaving Altus Systems without an infrastructure. The board asked Valerie and me to step out. We waited in the hallway for 3 hours while the lawyers were consulted. When we returned, Donald Croft announced they had accepted my terms. I would receive the executive role, the intellectual property rights, and the board seat. Valerie was demoted to regional operations, while a search for her replacement began. As we left the room, she thanked me for not destroying her completely. I told her that respect and recognition were my only goals, but I did not offer forgiveness. Some bridges could not be rebuilt. The next 9 months completely transformed the company. Julian Thorne faced federal prosecution under Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 1836, for theft of trade secrets, and his accomplice, Wesley Sharp, was indicted alongside him. The federal grand jury handed down indictments under the Economic Espionage Act, Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 1831. The court proceedings were swift, as the email evidence was undeniable. Julian was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, while Wesley Sharp received a 4-year sentence. Zenith Cloud was hit with heavy financial penalties, including an order to pay $3 million in damages to Altus Systems. Several clients, who had been approached by Sharp's company Zenith Cloud during the outage, testified against them, ensuring they would face significant prison sentences. I hired a team of talented engineers to expand my biomimetic computing platform, applying the natural load cycling principles to our cloud systems. The team worked to integrate our proprietary self-healing protocols into the primary database layers, making sure that no external intruder could exploit the system. We recruited 6 database engineers and 4 senior network architects who shared my vision of organic system design. We spent months rewriting the legacy codebase, converting the entire network to a hybrid biomimetic structure. We established new training programs for the junior developers, ensuring they understood the core principles of thermodynamics and energy efficiency. The stock price of Altus Systems soared after we announced partnerships with 4 Fortune 100 companies. The market recognized that our energy-efficient, self-healing infrastructure was the most reliable solution for modern enterprise needs. Our financial officers reported that our operational overhead had decreased by 30% within the first quarter of deployment. This massive margin improvement allowed us to invest heavily in research and development, securing our position as the market leader. I was invited to speak at the National Technology Summit, where I accepted the Innovation Impact Award. As I walked onto the stage, the applause was deafening. I stood at the microphone and thanked the committee. I spoke about how the natural world offers the best lessons for digital architecture, explaining that systems that rest and regenerate are not inefficient, but resilient. I explained that human engineers often design technology as if it were a mindless machine, forgetting that even the most advanced components suffer from thermal stress and mechanical fatigue. My biomimetic approach proved that sustainability and high performance could coexist in harmony. In the audience, Donald Croft and the board members smiled proudly, while Valerie sat further back, her expression quiet. I shared the lesson that true innovation does not fear disruption, but anticipates it. I did not mention that the same principle had saved my career. When they tried to discard me, they created the conditions for my victory. Julian's greed, Valerie's lack of oversight, and the board's desperation had all become leverage. In trying to make me redundant, they had made themselves obsolete. Now they worked to execute my strategy. As I finished my speech, my phone buzzed with an alert. Zenith Cloud was experiencing cascading failures across their entire network. The same firm that had tried to steal our clients was now watching their own infrastructure collapse because they did not have my patented technology. I smiled, realizing that sometimes the systems we build deliver justice all on their own. I walked off the stage, knowing my place in the industry was secure and the architecture I built would endure. My attorney, Diana Albright, met me at the edge of the stage, offering her congratulations. She handed me a document showing that the licensing royalties from our new partnerships had already surpassed our initial projections for the fiscal quarter. The 18% royalty clause was proving to be an incredibly lucrative asset, validating my decision to fight for my intellectual property rights. I looked back at the boardroom members who had once treated me as an adversary, realizing they were now entirely dependent on my designs. Later that evening, I sat in a quiet restaurant with my son Toby. He is 20 years old, studying computer science at Stanford, and he had flown in to watch the ceremony. He asked me if I felt any resentment toward the people who had tried to push me out. I shook my head and told him that resentment was a waste of energy. The experience had taught me that in the technology sector, as in nature, the entities that adapt are the ones that survive. Alta Systems was now stronger because of the crisis, and I had secured the recognition I deserved. I told Toby that the best revenge is not destruction, but building something that makes your enemies irrelevant. We raised our glasses in a quiet toast, celebrating the start of a new era. I realized that my journey from being discarded to being elevated was a proof that true innovation cannot be suppressed. We looked toward the future with confidence, knowing the path we had chosen was the right one. As I watched Toby talk about his own computer science projects, I knew that the legacy of my work would continue through the next generation.